Hello, my name is Ezra Berson, and today we're having a conversation with the Westford veteran, Terry Stader. A conversation with a Westford veteran is a project of the Westford Museum and Historical Society to conduct interviews of Westford's Korean and Vietnam veterans. This project is sponsored by the Massachusetts State Historical Records Advisory Board and the Veterans Heritage Grant Project. Before we get started, let me introduce myself. My name is Ezra Berson. I am a graduate of Westford Academy, class of 2023, and a summer intern at the Westford Museum. I am looking forward to majoring in history at Framingham State University. Today we're speaking with Terry Stader, who served in the Navy during the Vietnam Wars and afterwards, both active duty and in the Naval Reserves. Terry is a retired Veterans Service Officer for the town of Westford, and Terry continues to serve the town on various boards and committees. Thank you for sitting down with us, Mr. Stader.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Looking forward to it.
So one thing is, what made you want to join the Navy over other branches?
Well, back in the early 70s, the draft was still around, and I was a full-time student at University of Toledo, but I had dropped to be a part-time student, and my number was short on the list, so to speak. So I looked at the Navy as a possibility just to avoid going into the Army and going to Vietnam. Of course, that was on everybody's mind back then. I also had I had three uncles that were in the Navy, and I was very close with one of my uncles, spent a lot of time with him and got to understand what he did in the service. So I had Navy in the background of our family, so I decided the Navy was the best opportunity for me, and the education side of it, and just the opportunities to sail the world,
Yeah. What was your training like for the Navy?
Well, it was interesting. I was in college. I was electronics engineering technology program. I was a vocational high school graduate in electronics program, so I kind of knew I wanted to be in the Navy world called an ET, electronics technician. So I got selected. I originally enlisted for 4 years, and then I did an extension to get some advanced electronics. So I was in for 6 years, although I actually was in for more than that because of an opportunity I'll talk about later. But anyway, so I went to Electronics A school. Since I had a lot of previous electronics experience, I decided to try and do the accelerated side, because if I did the accelerated program, I could get both the two tracks. They had a radar track and a communications track. So I was originally designated as a radar type, so I ended up passing, just testing out on electronics classes, and it was really great. I got to do both the radar side and the communication side. Although I realized that I was completely testing out that I wouldn't be at school for that much longer because I would go back to the fleet. So I just say that I took unintentionally did not pass one of my accelerated courses. I went back into the school program. But I had great opportunity. The training was excellent. After Electronics A school, they shipped me out to Lowry Air Force Base. I was one of 20 sailors out in Denver, Colorado, and I went to a precision measurement equipment lab. And the ship I was assigned, I had already been assigned to the USS Gridley, which was a guided missile frigate. So they knew I was coming. I was going to be filling a billet of somebody that was leaving on that ship. And so they knew that I needed to have certain pre-qualifications. I was going to serve a certain role on board the ship. So I went to this PMEL school on Lowry, which allowed me to do a lot of precision test calibration of it, a lot of electronics, sophisticated electronics equipment that are on board the ships. After I finished that, then they sent me to Norfolk, Virginia to learn an SPS surface or an air search radar system. So I got to learn. I spent a lot of the first year of my Navy career was just all schools. So it was an excellent opportunity to get specialized education, so to speak. That was my school experiences.
Where did you go after your training?
After I finished up in Norfolk, Virginia, I ended up flying out to Long Beach, California, which is where the ship was. home ported at. The ship was already deployed, so even though I went there, I got assigned into the barracks, and then what they did is they arranged for transportation for me to fly from the Los Angeles area up to Travis Air Force Base out of near San Francisco. From there, I flew up to Alaska. Then over the top of the pole, I went to Japan, and then flew into Subic Bay in the Philippines. I caught a bus across the island and picked up the ship at the Subic Bay Naval Station in the Philippine Islands. And that's where I met the USS Gridley, which was my home for the next 4.5 years. So I spent I spent all my shipboard time oceanside, sea details, so to speak, or sea rotation on the USS Gridley. That's where I went after training. I finished up there, went to my ship.
Right. So what did you do on the USS Gridley?
Well, it's interesting. When you're on the ship, the USS Gridley has a complement of about 340 some officers and enlisted. So I had my primary job was working on this long-range air search radar. That was what they really needed me for. But as a collateral duty, I had this calibration lab experiences as well to be able to certify the electronics pieces on board the ship to make sure they were calibrated for measuring and setting the standards for all the electronics equipment, including communications and radar systems on board that ship. So the ship was a guided missile frigate. We had 2 launching systems to launch Terrier and Talos missiles, one forward and one aft, and that was our primary defensive weapon, so to speak, as well. It could be offensive. But anyways, our role on the ship was to, when an aircraft carrier, we were air traffic controllers. We had air traffic controllers assigned to the ship. And what our job primarily is to protect the ships or provide an envelope over the top of a large area in case there were any aircraft coming inbound to try and take out that. We would take out those aircraft. So we would provide that. That was my primary role, was working on that radar.
You mentioned earlier about participating in the evacuation of Saigon.
Sure.
Which you want to...
That was called Operation Frequent Wind.
Mm-hmm.
So my first tour in 72, 73 was we would sat off the coast of Vietnam and provided our duties, and then we went into an overhaul period. And then when we got redeployed back to the South China Sea, Vietnam was falling. Mm-hmm. South Vietnam was going to be, the government just wasn't going to make it. It was being overrun. So we were part of a group of a whole bunch of ships that were there. There's a standard procedure for evacuation of citizens in our country, in that country, and we also had an embassy there. So we were there providing a whole group of places where refugees could go. Now, we were considered a man of war. We did not hold any refugees, but our job was, again, to provide a big bubble over the whole area just in case anything become a hostile action, so to speak, and to take out any enemy forces. But there were so many ships in the water, so many small boats, helicopters, small private planes that were landing on these amphibious ships. And those of you that might have followed or seen movies of it, you'll see that that sailors were pushing aircraft off the top of flight decks because they were so overwhelmed with the evacuation process. So we were there for the evacuation of Saigon, and that was actually almost a 2-week event. We got called into the area about 2 weeks before the actual evacuation occurred on the 29th and 30th of April, or May, excuse me. And we were there for that. And then once we got released from that, we were actually on our way to some R&R in Australia. Mm-hmm. So we're going to be crossing the equator. But we got down within about a couple hundred miles of the equator, and then we ended up getting called back because the SS Mayaguez, which was a merchant marine ship, had been captured by Cambodians. So we were called back to the area again to provide air support for what they were going to do is send Marines into the island to retake the possession of the ship. We got somewhat delayed. That's actually considered the final combat mission for Vietnam. Unfortunately, there were 15 to 18 Marines killed on that encounter, and they're the last ones that are on the wall of the Vietnam Wall of the war. So that was interesting, listening to the radios and stuff like that, because I was in Combat Information Center, and we were quite heavily involved with that, or within radio range of a lot of it. And a very interesting scenario, let's put it that way. The evacuation of Saigon did not go as smoothly as what everybody wanted it to happen, but it hardly ever does when you have masses. You don't really know how many people were coming.
So what would you say was the most memorable part of being on the ship? Or
well, what I remember most about being on board the ship is that we were we were doing a mission, and the long-range three-dimensional air search radar that was used for targeting aircraft had failed. And so my radar, which was a backup, but it was a long-range air search radar, could see over the horizon radar, was playing a primary identification job. So it was the primary radar. And I remember working on it and being in the radar room. I had my own space, probably about this size of a room. And all of a sudden, the captain of the ship walks into me and comes into the room, bangs on the door, walks in, and tells me, he says, "Stader, we need you in this radar. Don't let it go down." And I remember that thinking, here I am, a single sailor. I think I might have been 21 years old, and responsible for this radar system that had a primary mission of, watching over such a large area. So that was one of my most memorable experiences, thinking that it really weighed on you that as somebody as young as 20, I had actually had 3 people working for me. I was a supervisor already at 20 or 21 years old. So the amount of responsibility that you have was meaningful to me, is that they counted on me to do this, and it was my job. I really enjoyed that piece of it.
So what did you do when you went into the reserves?
Well, I stayed in. I re-enlisted to get shore duty. So I spent the last 2 years of my active duty time in shore duty, and I actually worked in a calibration lab for that. So when I got out, I had this experience as an electronics technician, obviously, doing lots of different jobs. So when I got out, the Navy paid for me to move back to Toledo, Ohio area, which is where I was from originally. So I went back there and I interviewed for a job. And once I interviewed for the job, got a job in electronics technician, and then I decided that, well, it was 7 years, that if I could join something like the reserves and had a meaningful job with it, that I could retire at some point in time. So I joined the Navy Reserves. I started working on various electronics specialized projects, then moved out here to Massachusetts for the company I was working. And then I worked on jobs like engineering jobs. We were exploring satellite communications, submarine communications. I also worked on what now everybody calls Zoom and FaceTime. We worked on some of the original implementation of what was called virtual program offices, where you could do video teleconferencing and have a lot of people connected up at one time. So I got to do some really interesting jobs while I was in the Navy Reserves. So I worked for Navalex and Space and Naval Warfare Systems Command for the balance of my career. And then I got out in 1999 is when I was discharged from the Navy Reserve. So I enjoyed it. I think one of the most fascinating pieces of it was that I was working as a civilian in electronics and IT world, and then I also was doing IT work in the Navy. So we would exchange a lot of what I did. Kind of fit both sides, both worlds for me. So I really enjoyed my time in the Navy Reserves and what I could offer. So it was very beneficial for me. So I did retire with almost 27 years of service, over 27 years of service. So I got a great retirement out of it.
What did you do after retiring?
Well, after retiring, I stayed in the IT world, so I worked for a couple different companies. One of the companies wanted to move me to Long Island, which was their corporate headquarters, and I said, there's no way I'm moving to Long Island. It's more expensive than the Boston area. So I decided to become self-employed and was doing some contract work, and then I read an ad, or I read a job posting on the town of Westford's website about them needing a veteran service officer. So I applied for that job and got to sit in front of an interview and got the job. Originally, it was a part-time position, but they needed the job to evolve into a full-time position to meet the requirements of the state. We were a big enough community and population that we needed to have a full-time veterans agent. So I got into that. I loved that job. It was great because it was assisting veterans and families, spouses, and anybody that would need any tapping into resources. People getting out of the service, off of active duty, coming back into the civilian world, getting jobs, getting education benefits, health care, and a number of other things. So I became the service officer, was there for 10 years, and I decided at that point in time that I was old enough to retire, really retire. I retired in 2018. I had to think about it.
Yeah.
1999 was my Navy retirement. But so I retired in 2018, but I'm still active in a lot of things and still doing veteran support in a lot of different angles today, which I really enjoy doing.
Yeah, that's really awesome.
Yeah.
One last question is, what do you wish more people knew about veterans?
Well, that's a good question. I think what's important for a lot of our residents to know is that a lot of our folks that were on active duty who returned to their community, the town of Westford, served some really significant roles in this town and helped build it up to what it is today. I think that there are a lot of veterans that really helped build this community. We have a lot of veterans, not as many as there used to be because they're aging out. A lot of the World War II veterans are no longer around. Korea and Vietnam era veterans are Korea's getting quite old now, veterans. And Vietnam veterans, the early Vietnam veterans started in went to the war in 1960, in the mid-60s, and that ended in 1975. But so that makes them, 75, 80, 90 years old these days. So we have a lot of veterans in town. Like I said, we have Purple Heart recipients. We have prisoners of war. Not many of them of the World War II. None of the World War II prisoners of war are still around. But I think it's important for people to, a lot of times people will thank us for our service. It's pretty standard routine is that thank you for your service. What I think is interesting and what I think that it would be really great to do is ask them more about what did they do. Right. In other words, find out more, not just thank you for your service, but find out a little bit more about what kind of a job they did. Not every veteran's going to be open to it because some of them came back with images they don't want to have. Even just sitting here writing my notes out to this brought back some lots of memories of what I did while I was in the service. I'll look back on it now and think it was great. I loved it. But there were lots of times where I didn't love it. There were lots of exposure and traveling in foreign countries and seeing things that I never would have thought I would have seen at 20 and 21 years old. So I think there's a story behind every veteran, and I think people should ask about it. A lot of them are proud of it. Some are saying, "Oh, I did it because I had to do it," and whatever. But I think there's a lot of history. Just like walking around the cemeteries and looking at the names and how many flags, and you look at some of the names of those veterans that are buried there, that you think, geez, well, we know all these names, streets named after them, and it's a wonderful opportunity, and I want to thank our veterans for doing what they did, and everybody should hear their story.
All right, Mr. Stader, it was a pleasure to speak with you today. I would like to thank you for coming and sitting down with us and being able to record this.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much.
All right.